Putin and Prigozhin provided news hounds like me around the world with 22 hours of high drama and now seem to have reached an agreement that ended the coup, quote unquote. But for me, there's a list of unanswered questions, some of which could still provide direction for markets on Monday. We'll talk about some Tesla news, some financial news, and then I'll list those concerns about Russia going forward in today's episode. This is Randy Kirk. Hope you like my Saturday afternoon news when nobody else is reporting the news about Tesla. And if you do, then hit the like button, hit the subscribe button so you can. I'm doing 19 shows a week now. So you might want to subscribe and hit notify. Maybe you don't want to be notified 19 times. That's a lot. But, it's some of those are worthwhile and you'll pass on other ones anyway. And then, of course, you want to hit the, you go on down, look for the opportunity to become part of Patreon, and then buy the book. Okay. The good news for this afternoon is that the whole Russian dust-up is probably going to have no effect on the stock market Monday after all. Don't know if you listened to my report earlier today where I talked about everything I knew, which was not that much, but I did study it a lot today. And since I did that story this morning, I've listened to about another 2 or 3 hours and read another multiple articles in order to prepare for this particular episode. But anyway, at this point, I think there's a good likelihood that the market will do what the market's going to do, having nothing to do with Russia and Ukraine, unless, and that's why I've got that list down below. All right, halfway around the world from the Russian dust-up, 2 other combatants are preparing for a different kind of war. That would be Musk versus Zuck. That's how it's being billed. The MMA fight is coming. It's going to pit 6'2", 180-pound, approximately Musk, against 5'7", 155-pound Zuckerberg. Now, obviously, Zuckerberg is in great shape, and he's a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, but the height and weight difference are not inconsequential. It is going to make a difference. Let's look at this upcoming fight. If they really do this thing, they don't want to get booed off the stage, and they're going to get booed off the stage unless there's some actual fighting, some actual grappling, some kind of real fight going on. What in the world that might look like between these 2, let's call it what it is, amateurs, is really hard to get. Well, I'm saying that Elon will use some kind of first principles thinking and decide just exactly how to move atoms around in a cage with the most efficiency. Now, he says that's by using the walrus position, where he uses his extra height and weight to just kind of lay on top of Zuck until he says, uncle, or whatever they're going to use as the way to end the fight. I really don't have a clue. Certainly, it's going to be interesting to watch this take place. However, Elon has said he will begin to work out, which he doesn't normally do, and he will begin to train. So that alone could be interesting and provide lots and lots of potential humor, potential headlines, potential video. Who knows what we might get out of all of that, but it will be, as Elon says, entertaining. All right. Well, most of the Twitter sphere and the YouTube world have been focused on FSD this last week. That is where the action really has turned. And there's numerous reasons for that. Let me list the reasons. You probably know all these, but let me just list them anyway. Number 1, the market right now wants to up its bet on AI. It's looking for the next NVIDIA. It's looking for the next ChatGPT. Of course, for years, it's been looking for the next Tesla. And a lot of people have been saying, well, the next Tesla is Tesla, because there's still dramatically obvious potential for Tesla to 100 times its current share price and maybe more than that. So anyway, we're not 100% clear why the rest of the world hasn't quite figured out that Tesla is probably the leading in my opinion, is the leading AI company in the world, both in its capabilities of building chips, in its capabilities of using deep learning approaches, in terms of its engineering staff. Does anybody question that Tesla has the best engineers in the world? Anyway, so that seems to be number one reason why I think right now the emphasis is on FSD. Number two, Dojo News has given the headlines meaning. In other words, if Dojo is big enough and fast enough, then it should really only be a matter of time before FSD is a real thing. I'll talk about that more in a minute, but that's what Elon has always said. You need the data and you need the compute. And of course, you need the engineers. You need the people that know how to train for that. I think all three are in place. That's why I think it's only a matter of time. Well, the fudsters are getting nervous. And that's been a big part of what you're seeing on Twitter right now and in YouTube. The fudsters are upping their negative commentary. So the leader today of the fudsters is Dan O'Dowd. And he got himself another dose of publicity by finally getting he kept asking and asking for some Tesla bull to go out and demo FSD with him in the car. And he had all kinds of reasons, things that he was requiring for that to take place. And so one by one, people said, nope, not going to do it. Well, Ross Gerber, who's another, publicity hound, Ross Gerber finally said, look, I'll do it. So they've created about an hour of video with Ross driving Dan around. I think Dan has said before that he had never tried FSD himself, even though he owns, I think, 2 or 3 Teslas. Maybe none of them are equipped with it, or he just didn't want to he didn't want to risk his life, I guess, in his opinion. And so I don't think he had ever driven it himself, but they've used it in some of these ridiculous demonstrations. Anyway, there's about an hour of video. And in this hour of video, there was a situation where Ross is coming around a curve. There is a stop sign warning. As they come around the curve, they've been clever enough to put this warning up that says stop ahead. And then apparently Ross does a number of things. He's cut off by a car at about the same time. All kinds of things are going on. And then when he gets close to the intersection, the car is not slowing down, and eventually he puts on the brakes and slows the car down. Now, Dan O'Dowd immediately says this was a failure of FSD, proving that FSD is not ready for the road. And this is an example of what's wrong with Dan's whole approach, and why nobody takes him seriously is because that was a rookie error to immediately make that conclusion without looking at everything in slow motion and seeing what really took place. Well, there's some evidence that Ross made some errors there, made some driving errors. There's some evidence that he didn't, that he actually did what was the smart thing. When he got cut off by that vehicle, he took off FSD so that he could deal with the situation himself. There's evidence that he was slowing down the car by rolling down the little scroll on the steering wheel. But whatever the evidence is, it turns out that he was fully stopped before he ever got to the intersection, before the line. In fact, before that even, he was fully stopped. So it wasn't like there was ever any danger. Anyway, don't know how all of this will play out. It looks to me like it really shows Dan O'Dowd to be not very smart, not very good, not very balanced in how he arrives at his opinions, not very analytical, which is odd since he's in the software space and apparently is a billionaire. I don't know. I think it was all a net positive, but anyway, that's number 3. Number 4, FSD is getting better and better by all accounts. It's hard for me to make a case that it isn't just a matter of more compute and more data and more work on edge cases. I think that's what it is. I think that that's what has to happen. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that with what the evidence we have, like for instance, Chuck Cook's left turn being solved, roundabouts getting better and better, all of these all these harder cases are getting better. I think it's just a matter of how many times do you have to run it through that simulator before you finally get it right. Anyway, there was only one financial piece of news that I could find today, and it was an important one. It's one I've been talking about for a very long time, and I always like it when I'm right. So home listings, the total number of new home listings available to purchase right now fell to 1.4 million. That is a record low. There is no inventory. in order to give you a comparison, before we went into the pandemic, we already had historic inadequate amounts of property. We were already at historic lows. You want to know what the historic lows were? 2.2 million available in May of that year. Home listings are now at 1.4. That is, 30-40% less than it was then. So it's crazy how few properties are on the market right now. No amount. It doesn't matter what the Fed does in terms of raising rates. It isn't going to build more buildings. And it isn't going to get homeowners like me and probably you off the sidelines and decide to sell and get rid of our 2.5, 3% loans. We're not going to, it's just idiocy to think that anybody sells a house that they have a 3% loan on or a 2.5% loan on unless they're absolutely forced to. So no, there's not going to be more inventory until people start building more homes. And the only way people are going to start building more homes is if the interest rates come down so that builders believe that A, they can borrow the money at a rate that makes sense in order for them to start building the home because they've got to borrow the money while they're building it. And then that there's going to be people willing to buy that home when it's built because mortgage rates will be at a level that makes sense. I think they could start now. Quite frankly, I think they're missing a bet because I don't think people are going to care about loans at these levels. If the house is available, it's a good price, a good value, a good product. Right now, they're going to buy homes because there's nothing to buy. Anyway, that is my rant once again. Now let's go back to the coup that happened and then didn't happen. So if you're behind on the news, Prigozhin, goes on his way to Moscow. He takes over a couple of towns. He shoots down 7 helicopters and some kind of plane that the Russians sent over to visit with him as he's making his way to Moscow. He gets to within 200 clicks of Moscow. That's about 120 miles of Moscow. A couple of hours, at 60 miles an hour, maybe 4 hours for the troops to get to Moscow, and then he stops and says, okay, I'm going back. We're going back to base. Well, and everybody's like, what in the world's going on? Well, it turns out that he'd made a deal. So he's made a deal, and the deal is good enough for him to say, okay, I'm done. I'll quit. So he starts, packing up and heading back to the base. And it turns out where he's really going is to Belarus, because that was part of the deal, is that he and maybe his band of merry men, I've heard varying accounts of whether that's 2,000 or whether that's 10,000. Anyway, however many of his merry men, his close compadres are going to go to Belarus. And then maybe some of those will go back and fight in Africa, which is some of the other fronts where he's fighting as a mercenary business. That's what they do. They fight wars for other people. So anyway, the Wagner Group is now out of the fight in the Ukraine. So he got everything he wanted, apparently. So that's pretty crazy. So number one, these are the issues that will be coming up, I think, over the next 2 days, some of which could affect the market. We'll see. Number one, what's the impact on Putin's reputation? Well, I've heard arguments both ways. It will matter if he is diminished in terms of his reputation among the people or among his leadership or among world leaders. I vote that he looks weak. Prigozhin got everything he wanted. It didn't seem like that Prigozhin had to do much to get everything he wanted, and that Putin didn't do very much to fight back. So it makes him look weak. I could be completely wrong on that. Number two, what will be the impact on the Ukraine war? Well, the Wagner Group was the one bright spot in the Russian war effort. For the most part, the Russians have been they've been characterized, and maybe it's not true, but they've been characterized as being pretty bad at this. That this has not been a bright spot for the Russian military, and they're using conscripts and they're using prisoners in order to fight this war, and they just haven't done very well. Now they've fought to a stalemate, but Anyway, but the Wagner Group, that was apparently the bright spot, maybe the one reason why it is a stalemate. And now if they're off the field along with their commander, what has Russia got left down there? So does that mean we could potentially see an end to the Ukrainian war because of this? Well, that would certainly be a huge boost to the market. How will the Ukraine respond immediately? So there was not a ton of response in the 24 hours that all of this was taking place. But maybe they were positioning themselves. Maybe they made a few advances that we just haven't heard about yet. But between now and Monday morning, what will it look like the Ukrainians have done in order to take advantage of this weakness, in order to take advantage of the confusion? Will they have acted smartly and quickly in order to take advantage? We'll see, because they were supposedly already in a they were in a new offensive, responding to the fact that some of their territory had been taken over recently by the Russians. All right, number 4, what happens to the Wagner Group? As I mentioned, apparently they just head off to do more battles in Africa, or do they just put their feet up in Belarus? I'm not sure. I'm not sure it matters, but it is a question in my mind. What's going to happen? What? They're apparently an important mercenary group. What happens to them, and will it affect anything? Number 5, what happens to Russia's top military leadership? The main reason that that this entire thing got started, that Prigozhin was mad and wanted to do this thing, was because he thought that the top military leadership had actually fired on his troops and killed a couple of thousand, or killed and wounded a couple of thousand of his troops. That's a pretty significant battle between factions of the Russian leadership in the war. Anyway, that's what he said happened. He felt those two guys were corrupt and needed to be out of business. And apparently Putin's agreed to do that, but we just don't know yet. As of the time I'm producing this, we don't know if in fact those two guys have been let go, have have been exiled. We do know that there was a lot of planes flying. Honestly, I didn't know all this was possible. Now people can watch planes and they know if they've put in their heading or not. So apparently there was in a very short period of time, there was 7 or 8 planes that left, passenger planes that left Moscow, passenger jets that left Moscow that had no heading, no bearing. They didn't know, weren't announcing where they were going. Were those some of these top leaders? Were these some of the people that had flipped on Putin? What happens to those folks? How many people are going to go to jail or worse? Okay. We'll see if any of that plays out between now and Monday, and it may or may not affect the markets. Right now, I'm guessing it's all neutral, and other things will move the market possibly. If you want to see what I think later in the week, well, then that would say that you should tune in Sunday night. That would be usually around this time on Sunday, when I give you my, what I call the Monday morning show, my analysis of what's coming up in the next week and how that might affect markets. Or you could listen to the actual Monday morning usually I try to get it out by 7:10 Pacific, which is 40 minutes after the market's open. I try to get it out as fast as I can. I wait until the market has been open for about 10 minutes so that I can get some direction on all of the major components of the market after it's actually open. You can look at the pre-market, but sometimes the pre-market is not a very good judge of what the market's really going to do. So I wait until it's open for about 10 minutes, and then I shoot the video, and then I put it up as fast as I can. And that usually means about 10 minutes after 7 Pacific, 10 minutes after 10 Eastern. So watch for those, hit like, hit subscribe, notify if you want to be notified about those. And of course, that show goes every morning, Monday through Friday. And then, of course, love it if you join Patreon and buy the book. All right. It's been great talking to you.